Welcome everybody today. My name's John, and it's my pleasure to welcome from Tahoe, California, Kirsty Traill to this KLP or Territory 3 Academy webinar about all things customer. Kirsty, welcome.
Thanks, John. Nice to be here.
It's fantastic to have you on, and many of our attendees have probably been familiar with your work, but it's always a great idea if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, sure. So as you can probably tell, I am passionate about all things customer, as you might have deduced. Currently, I'm on the board of directors and the chief operating officer at a company called Enspirement, which I founded with some fellow friends about 3 months ago. We just recently launched our site. Enspirement is a platform that inspires educators and parents to create, to really transform the early years experience through meaningful environmental design. Really, like we like to say, we're defending the wonder of childhood, which I really like the sound of. And ultimately, children grow and learn a lot quicker during the first 6 years of their life than at any other time of their life, which is why child environments have a disproportionate effect on children's learning, and why we're really passionate about having an impact there. As well as that, I sit on the board of Storypark, which is an early childhood education platform that helps document early childhood learning and bridge the gap between educators and parents to really create better outcomes for children. And I'm also an operating partner at Movac, as well as a Beachhead Advisor for NZTE. On the corporate side, I've spent the last year and a half at Yext, which is a search experience cloud, as the VP of Client Advocacy. And before that, I was the VP of Customer at Hootsuite, which is a social media platform. And prior to that, I was at Snapfish. So I like to say I've been kind of bouncing my way around the marketing and technology stack between search and social and e-commerce. Before that, I worked in Japan for a couple of years on the e-commerce side. And of course, I'm from New Zealand. And spent the earlier part of my career at Hewlett-Packard, which is obviously where you and I met all those years ago.
We did, back in the good old HP days. And it's really cool. One of the things we're going to talk about is your experience later in this, just around being a big company as a VP, vice president of a publicly listed company, and then actually going into startup land yourself and some of the differences. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. But just to kick things off, we've got a bunch of folks, about 50 folks online here. We've got a community of 6,000. We've been doing this for 11 years. It never ceases to amaze at any stage, really, just how much continual prompting our founders need about just really getting that customer strategy and customer awareness right. I just wondering if you could sort of walk us through in an early stage to this journey. What experience would you be getting really close to from a customer point of view when your team is, literally one to 5 people?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I totally agree with it. It resonates not only with my experience kind of advising startups, but also my most recent experience with Enspirement, is, how critical it is, and how, I don't want to say hard it is, but how much of a part of the process that a lot of people forget how important it is. And so ultimately it starts with really knowing and understanding who your target customer is, right? Before you even start thinking about what you're going to do and how you're going to design your product and what your solution or offering is going to be, the first thing is like, who is the person, who is the target customer, who is it that you're going to serve? And then what is the problem that you're going to solve, right? And so, what is their pain point? What is their issue? What is the problem that they're having? And then how are you going to uniquely solve that problem that's different and, has enough kind of barriers to entry than anybody else? So those are kind of the first couple of things. And then I would say the other layer I would put on top of that is then how big of a market is that, right? So it's all very well to solve a good customer problem and have a great solution to a real customer need. But if that's a really tiny market and doesn't have, a lot of ability to scale, then depending on what your aspirations are, you may want to think about trying to identify either a bigger problem or maybe a larger market. So that's the first thing. And then in terms of the actual process, before you even start kind of thinking about building or designing product or whatever your solution or offering is, I think the first thing is really talking to customers, right? Or people that fit the profile of what your potential customer base looks like. So at Enspirement, for example, our target customer base are early childhood educators. or centre owners like daycare or nursery centre owners and parents, right? And so from that standpoint, going out and asking them like, how do they think about their child's environment? What kind of thought processes go into planning these environments and the design of these environments and how do children interact in those environments, right? So learning about what people are doing today and where there might be pain points or where people have frustrations or encountering issues. And then the second part of that is starting to codify, codify and document like all of this so that you can actually start to not report on it, but start to see kind of patterns and trends and what people are telling you, right? Like it's all very well to go out and talk to customers, but if you're all just listening and hearing it and not really kind of documenting it anywhere, then it's very hard to actually start to look at and synthesize and go back to, well, this person said that and that person said that, and is it the same thing or is it different or nuanced or what have you? The third part of that is then actually starting to validate that and building what, as you and I know is called like an MVP, minimum viable product. So getting something together that you can then get in front of customers to say, well, if we were to give you this in response to the problem that you've identified or the pain point that you've mentioned, what do you like about it? What don't you like about it, right? And so that gets you the ability to start understanding where you might have opportunities to fine tune or tweak your idea, where you might be wildly off the mark or where you've really, really hit the nail on the head and customers are like, oh my God, absolutely. Like if you could build this for me, I would be a loyal customer. And that's another really, really important part of the process. And then obviously bringing that information back and starting to do the testing and the learning and the iterating and the tweaking, and then ultimately creating your kind of beta or MVP and then being able to go out to market in a meaningful way and testing it with groups of customers before you really kind of expand it to the mass market. So, thinking about how can you pilot this within certain segments of your customer base or certain groups or certain areas, and then get that feedback and continue to kind of test and learn and then ultimately develop a kind of a go-to-market plan.
Yeah, and this process never stops, right? And so, you've obviously seen it run from early stage through to massive companies. I mean, Hootsuite, how many users? I think 18 to 20 million users worldwide.
Yeah. Snapfish had 100 million. So, these are a lot of customers out there that we're looking at customer feedback.
Yeah. So, a continual process in the build out of a business. So, from your point of view, what kind of stays true as the core things that you just actually have to keep really, really in front of mind as that business grows from a customer point of view, and maybe some tips and tricks around some of the harder ones to keep engaged, because I guess sort of two pieces to this as well, right? Because you can go out and talk to a lot of customers, but a lot of customers, when they get friendly with a brand, or even in the early days, if you're an early founder, they want to tell you positive things, which is sometimes not that useful in terms of what the customer problem really is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think there's a few things. I think understanding where that customer kind of fits. One of the litmus tests we used at Hootsuite when we conducted customer interviews and looked at customer feedback was what was their net promoter score. And we were very intentional about looking at not just the promoters, but also looking at the detractor feedback and looking at what was consistent across that feedback, like what did everybody want, regardless of whether they were a promoter or a detractor, and then what were the differences, like those people that really were giving us less than 6, like what were the things that they were really asking for versus the people that were giving us a 9 or 10, and then kind of prioritizing that accordingly. And so making sure that you're actively seeking out. I mean, we would actively survey churned customers to understand like why they're churned. And again, like just, for clarity for people on the call, like it doesn't always have to be one-on-one customer interviews, which, I know a lot of people are in the earlier stages, it can be quite time intensive and obviously takes a lot of resource and kind of coordination. You can actually also do some of this by like, just a mass survey tool, right? So, if you've got a customer that's downgrading in their billing system, why don't you just set up and automate through like a SurveyMonkey or a MailChimp, like an automatic survey to just send out when someone cancels their account or downgrades from paying to non-paying, that just asks them like 5 questions around, why are you canceling and so on and so forth. So you can actually start to gather and analyze that data. And I think the discipline of looking at data, I mean, that's something that's consistent, and looking, as you say, not just at the positive data and asking friends and what have you, but also looking at people that might not be as familiar with the product or the service, but do fit within that target customer group or potential customer group, so that you get really valid feedback from people that may not be kind of predisposed towards giving you positive feedback. So that's I think a really important part of the mix. And I would say it goes across not just customer feedback, but data in general. I think one of the best disciplines that you can develop is a regular cadence of reviewing data and understanding what it's telling you. Certainly at Enspirement, we have a weekly directors call, and every week we'll look at registrations, we'll look at what our conversion from non-paying to paying is, we'll look at our acquisition sources and the countries of origin, right? And we'll review our sales pipeline, right? And we're really just trying to learn and make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the feedback that we're taking out of like what this data is telling us, and then which actions as a team that we're going to go away and take to make sure that we're continuing to optimize the customer experience and grow the business. And then sometimes I think some of the gotchas or some of the things, I mean, certainly a personal example, I remember at Hootsuite, as the VP of customer, looking at some of the customer insights and making business cases to make certain changes to areas of the product. And of course, some were really successful and we had huge wins, and we, re-optimized big areas of the site, which, improved conversions and reduced churn and improved the customer experience and so forth. And then other things that you feel quite passionate about and you can't quite understand, like, why they haven't been prioritized or how certain things were prioritized over others. And then you're actually in the shoes of, being a member, like a founding member of the company, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, now I really do have to kind of eat a little bit of humble pie and go through the experience myself. And the example I'll give you is, we've put the Enspirement website in front of hundreds of people, again, both people that are familiar with us as founders and people that are kind of complete strangers. And one thing that was consistent across a lot of the feedback that we were getting from people was, you really need to put the pricing on the website, right? And just as from a customer experience standpoint, from a design standpoint, from a UX standpoint, I mean, just the kind of like permeates every bone in my body is something I really viscerally don't want to do. Like, I really don't want to do that. And so I had to kind of stop and pause and think, well, why am I having this reaction to this? Like, and also, why are all these people telling us to put the pricing on the website? Like, there must be a reason for it. And so when we actually went out and we dug back in and we asked them, like, okay, but why? Like, wouldn't you just click through and hit the page and what have you? And they were like, it's such a beautiful website and it's so well designed, and it looks like very, it's a design-led, we're a design-led company, right? And they were just literally, it looks very expensive. Like, I might not be able to afford it. And so, the fact is, our pricing structure is designed to be, it's designed for, parents and educators. The cost of subscription is like equivalent to, I would say, like maybe less than a flat white a month. So, $2.99 a month or $29.99 a year. And people were like, I was actually really surprised by how affordable it was. And I might have self-selected out of, of becoming a subscribing or a paying member. And like anything, you have to take that feedback on board. It's valid feedback. And if it's consistent, valid feedback from customers, then, you have to listen to that, despite what your kind of, internal reaction to it might be. And so, in this example, we listened to our customers, we put the pricing on the website in a number of different places, and we're really adopting now a test and learn approach to see, well, what does this do to our conversion rates, and are we going to see more people through the funnel, and what does that mean for us? So, with anything, you don't necessarily want to take it carte blanche, but you do have to, I think, particularly as a founder, really step outside of your own beliefs and your own kind of like thinking and experience, and truly put yourself in your customer's shoes. And in the case of Enspirement, as I said earlier, our target customer is early childhood educators, daycare and nursery owners and managers and parents. And I am none of those things, right? So it's very, very important that I listen to my customer and take their feedback on board, because they are the people that ultimately are the consumer of our product, our platform.
Yeah, totally. And it sounds simple, right? But it's quite hard to do consistently. I mean, just in terms of the tech side, I mean, we're talking from Tahoe to Queenstown here, and we've got people dialed in from all over the place. Technology is just underpinning so many cool things you can do with customer interviews and that type of thing. But coming from somewhere like Hootsuite or Yext with all the tools and tech that you had there, down to how do we do this on a slightly different budget in the startup. What have you learned from that, and what do you use in terms of those processes you described to help you keep track of the NPS and those answers and all of that sort of key information?
Yeah, and it's, I think, a great question. I mean, I think one of the biggest differences between like working for a larger startup or a publicly listed companies, you do have all these amazing tools and technology at your disposal, and often like a number of people to help you out with the actual doing of the work and the process. And I've actually quite enjoyed, as counterintuitive as it might seem, like getting really, I mean, I was always close to customers, but really getting rolling up my hands and rolling up my sleeves, sorry, and getting my hands dirty. Rolling up my hands would be difficult. And getting out in front of customers and really talking to them. And so, I talk to people a lot about, you can do, I mean, look, Google G Suite is an amazing, portfolio of has tools and technology and what have you. So from that standpoint, I think between having some kind of software that you can record, like a Zoom or some kind of, webinar platform that you can actually record the customer interviews if possible, because again, with the current environment notwithstanding, it's a little hard to get face-to-face sometimes to your customers, and often being able to then talk to customers in a free way. Effectively, I would recommend like having a list of questions, right, that you can ask customers, because you want to have a standardized set of questions, so that you're asking the same consistent questions, and then you can actually compare the responses, right? So, having that in some kind of Google Sheet or doc where you can record that information and look at that, or even something like a Google form, right? Like if you don't have the capacity, or you're looking to try and get a lot of customer information at scale, you can create like some kind of Google form and send it out and have people fill out a Google form, and then look at analyzing that kind of information, in the back end, whether it's via a word cloud or, reading through the verbatim and kind of categorizing the comments and sort of creating some of that information. Again, depending on the scale, I think you can use a variety of different kind of tools and plugins to be able to manage that. But I mean, if you're really kind of at the grassroots, there's, a bunch of free tools that you're really easily able to access to be able to do that. I also think tools like, as I said, like MailChimp, SurveyMonkey. I'm personally a huge fan of HubSpot. The ability to, integrate all of your customer information and be able to send out and gather and analyze data and feedback around not just, the responses that you're getting, but also the information around how many people clicked and opened and where did they click an email. I mean, it's so insightful, and you can learn a lot from looking at that kind of data as well. So, everything from full-blown CX solutions, but if you're really kind of starting out, like I honestly think you can really leverage the G Suite technology and recordings and ultimately document and codify your information that way if you need to.
Yeah, cool. There's just so much in that G Suite now as well in terms of the analytics in addition. So you mentioned CRM, and as you know, I'm a sales human. Talk to us a little bit, and folks, I must haven't already mentioned, and some of you, or most of you, will be familiar with the question and answer tab on Zoom. So if you do have any questions for Kirsty, just start firing them into that Q&A, and we'll take some breaks as we go through to look at those and go through them and answer as best we can. But CRM, right? Salespeople versus kind of customer and marketing and so forth. You will have seen a lot of these things, and I'm going to fully, confess here that I am not a big fan of CRMs when it comes to actually putting stuff in them for a bunch of reasons, and that makes it difficult for the customer side of the business, even if it's just the founder's, brain wanting to sort of analyze some of that stuff. Any tips or tricks for actually sort of driving that that information sort of imperative into sales, and getting sort of a happy balance between people perhaps like me who are not big fans of sort of lots of data entry versus what's really critical? Well, we may have just lost Kirsty on that.
Am I still here? Oh,
yes,
there we
yeah.
go.
Just froze briefly. Did you hear my question?
I did, yeah. So how do you get the salespeople to enter enough information in the CRM to give enough insight into marketing and the post sales team? So we did a lot of work around this at Hootsuite actually, and it is a fine balance, right? Because as a company or as an organization, you really don't want your customer. Do I have you?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you.
Keep going. So as an organization, you really don't want your salespeople spending all their time doing administration, right? Like you want salespeople out in the field talking to customers and selling and ultimately building those relationships. And yet at the same time, without the right information in the CRM, your implementation and delivery, which is a very pivotal part of the true kickoff of the customer experience on the post-sale side, can falter, and obviously that can cause issues down the track. And then ultimately you need to have enough information for your customer success teams and your marketing teams to be able to deliver meaningful communications and build relationships, right? And so from that standpoint, I think as you're creating your CRM, I think it's very, very important to look at what information are you collecting and why are you actually collecting that information? Like, why are you asking your salespeople to enter in that information? And I think there's, as I said, a very fine balance between that, right? And I think there's probably some core information that most companies want and need outside of, the customer name and the industry and the size of the organization around, what is the ultimate customer goal? Like, how are they measuring success? What are their KPIs? And how are they defining value, right? Like, in my mind, those are like the core pieces of information that you need to be able to be successful on the post-sales side of the experience, and having those as kind of mandatory fields. And then I think you can add other fields into the CRM that, can help shape some of that downstream data capture and, and optimization of the customer experience. But I would sort of break those into what's a mandatory field to have that you really want your salespeople to kind of categorize versus what's a nice to have, which is, maybe something that you can collect at a different point along the journey. And, some, without wanting to give too many examples, but things like, why are we close winning or close losing deals, right? And, that is, in my mind, like absolutely mandatory information. And that includes renewals as well, right? And that's like core insight that you need to be able to take back to a product team, to a marketing team, even back to like sales enablement to understand and help shape the future direction and go to market of the company, versus things like, how big's the organization? Well, arguably you can find that information in lots of other different places and kind of augment it at a later stage.
Yeah, I think definitely as a salesperson, having too many fields just automatically switches you off, even entering a small number of them, right? Yeah. We've got a couple of questions here. This one's from Bryce. Katie, can you see the questions, or shall I just read this one out?
Oh, yeah. I think I can see them here on my screen. Let me just pop them up. Bryce, okay. Do you want to read it out, or do you want me to?
I can read it for you. It's so Bryce, thanks for your question. Great session, Kirsty. How would you approach customer support in a minimum viable product environment? We're close to concluding 3 paid MVP partners for a B2B SaaS product and have a significant network effect with around 400 companies having access to the product as a guest via the partners who are on the MVP. And we think the best way to serve this is to offer customer service to the 400 guest clients, with the objective of converting guests to licensees. It's a challenge to predict how much support customer services will be required, and we need to plan really well for this. Clients are global, so we need to follow the sun from a support perspective. So any sort of thoughts just around setting up for what looks like potentially a big scale and customer service requirement?
Yeah, I mean, the way I would approach this is I would look at where are your customers, right? Like you've obviously got 400 guest clients. If that's 400 in total, or whether they all have like 10 seats each, or what the order of magnitude of the client base. And then I would look at and maybe use as a proxy, like some kind of industry benchmark or standard around like a contact rate. Certainly I would say somewhere around like the 5% mark is usually between 5 and 10% is high. Like once you're getting to double digit contact rate, like that is probably indicating that you may have a deeper issue within maybe the platform or information or the way that you onboard clients. But I would look at, like around maybe between a 5 and 10% kind of contact rate. And then I would look at where in the world are your clients and what time zones. And so therefore, what kinds of things do you think they're going to be asking you? And you may be able to, like, depending on your MVP and whether you've set up like a help site or a help center or not, you can look at your site analytics on your help center and see like which FAQs or which help articles are people clicking on. And that will probably give you an indication, or depending on which service CRM or support CRM you're using, ticketing system, sometimes you have a thumbs up, thumbs down scenario. So you could look at where your help, use your help content to guide what kind of questions you think people will be asking your team. And then I would ultimately think about how long do you think each contact will take, right? So if it's like phone based, obviously then you have an additional level of complexity because you're really wanting to staff a live channel, versus if it's email based, you have the ability to kind of manage that by have it depending on what your service level is, so how quickly you've said that you'll get back to customers. But then think about if a person can answer, is it one question an hour, is it 2 questions an hour, then if you can answer 2 questions an hour, then you can get through 8 to 16 tickets a day kind of thing, right? And then looking at where in the world are your customers and using that contact rate, thinking about which time zone are they in and how much time is between the time they submit the ticket and the time that you've said that you'll get back to them, so that you can actually kind of manage and staff accordingly. And I have a model, I can't remember if it's posted to my LinkedIn or not, but I'd be happy to share like a 1-pager of just how to think about staffing and thinking about how many people you should have and which channels you should support. Because again, some of it depends on the nature of your business and ultimately the service you want to provide. If you're an events company, you can't have a 1-day response time via email if someone's got a live event, right? Like they want help right now and you need to provide either chat or phone support. If you have something that's incredibly technically complex and you want people to send screenshots or get on a call, right, you may be able to have a 4-hour or an 8-hour SLA where you can get back to somebody and after you've dug in and triaged and understood what the question is. So you can actually kind of manage that and use that to manage the team accordingly. And then absolutely jumping in as founders, I imagine you probably have the most product knowledge of anyone else on the team. But another way to manage that is if, obviously if there isn't volume, thinking about when that volume comes in, what can people be doing when they're not answering support tickets, and how can they be creating onboarding material or writing help articles or, creating some of that customer training and enablement, because these people are really close to what customers are asking and what information they need. So they're really good people to be kind of helping to work on a lot of that information for you as well.
Very cool. Hope that helps you out for us.
Yeah, hopefully that's a great question.
Question from Amelia. Hi, Amelia.
Congrats on 400 people on your MVP. That's great.
Yeah, that's big. Very good.
Yeah, it's really good.
This is from Amelia. We have trouble getting our customers to give their feedback. Do you have any advice on how we can improve our hit rate on feedback from customers?
Yes, this is a great question, Amelia. So I think from my experience, it depends on how you're asking for feedback and where in the customer journey you're asking for that feedback and how in depth of the questions, like what kind of feedback you're asking for. And I'll give you a personal example just to demonstrate the point. when we first started measuring Net Promoter Score at Hootsuite, we used to send out a survey, and originally we had quite a lower response rate. It was still a good response rate in the low double digits, but we wanted a larger sample size and we wanted more robust feedback. And what we were doing is we were sending the survey. It was an email-based survey that automatically was sent out. I think it was like 2 weeks after the customer had originally registered and activated their account with Hootsuite. We then changed that and engaged with an organization that actually pops up a little survey mechanism in the dashboard. And we set certain parameters around when we wanted to survey our customers. And we decided that we wanted to survey them 3 months after they were onboarded for our enterprise customers, because they'd had enough time to get used to the platform and start using it. And then 3 months before they were about to renew, so that we had enough time that if something, if there was some issues, we had a 3-month window to address those before the renewal came around. And the windows were slightly different for our self-serve customers, right? Because they had a faster time to value. So, think about, and our response rate went up to 40%. So it basically, I think we doubled or slightly more our response rate, and started getting much more robust feedback by changing the mechanism and the way that we surveyed our customers. So that's one thing I would think about is, when are you surveying customers in their customer journey, and does it make sense? And is it aligned to the types of questions that you're asking them? So, if you're trying to get initial onboarding feedback, look at what your product data is telling you when customers actually get into that. When are they actually getting into the product? If you've got an onboarding issue and you're trying to, or you're not seeing customers get through that kind of self-serve onboarding curve, then think about, where are they dropping off? So this is where you'd start using your Google Analytics data or something like a Pendo.io to see like, okay, well, my customers are dropping off on page 2. Oh, that's my registration page. Oh, I'm asking for 10 different fields. What if I drop that to 3? Does that change, right? So start kind of using other data and thinking about how you might be able to augment some of that customer feedback with maybe some of the other quantitative data points you have, and just play around with it. Like, again, another example we had at Hootsuite when we were looking at starting to quantify marketing attribution. We just popped up a little pop-up survey on the website that when people landed on the website, if they were a net new visitor, I think after 30 seconds, it popped up and asked, how did you find out about us? And it was a little survey, you clicked the button and it went away. And it was a great, we put it up for a week, we ran it, we took it down, we analyzed the data, we got a lot of really good insight that helped us to then, make a lot of decisions around various different marketing channels. So think about, what kind of information you're asking and other ways that you might be able to find and put that question or that survey experience in front of the customer. Generally speaking, email is the lowest. Because let's face it, like we're all rolling up our unwanted emails and deleting and filtering and all of the things, right? So, from that standpoint, think about maybe getting a little creative around a pop-up or an interstitial, or depending on what kind of data, like even a random phone call or text message or something that makes it really easy for the customer to just a couple of clicks and they're done, and then you can kind of like start iterating from there.
Cool. And sort of on a similar theme from Siobhan, thanks for your question, Siobhan. What would your advice to a brand new startup for a digital product wanting to create and implement a customer experience strategy from the beginning? And the example she's sort of guiding towards in terms of some perspective is deciding goals when still in the build stage, and what else should a CV lead design and implement from day one?
Yeah, so this would be, I think, another area in which I would want to take customer feedback and start to quantify and look at where you think the value is, right? So if you've got a product that, let's say, has or a solution that has like 3 component pieces, and you're looking at when do we build out each one of these different pieces, then I would ultimately talk to customers and say, what's the biggest pain point, right? Like, what's the biggest pain point you face? And then I would say, well, here are 3 different ways we could solve that. Which one do you think solves the need the greatest, right? Or which one solves your need the best? Or which one would you prefer? And then the qualitative question, which is the why. Like, why would you like that? And then I would use that to start to prioritize how to effectively build which pieces of the platform first. And again, like, to take an Enspirement example, when we first started out, we actually thought we were going to launch an e-commerce site, right? Like, our initial kind of charter when we all got together was like, actually, there's a big gap in the market, and we want to provide these inspiring designs, and we want to provide a way for people to be able to find and purchase these across our curated design set that we really believe in and stand by. And when we actually went out to market and started talking to customers and validating and putting in front of, and look, in the beginning, we were like showing people wireframes, we were like sketching things and, asking people, what about this, and so on and so forth. And again, like, overwhelmingly, the feedback that came back is like, yeah, the e-commerce is great. Like, I definitely will like purchase at some point down the track. But really what I'm desperate for are resources. What I really want are, guides and how to, and content that tells me like how to get from where I am today to, where I want to be in terms of these environments, and help me to make a business case internally kind of thing, and help me to show other people on my team why this is important, and show me kind of how, because I think everybody understood that it was important, but people really wanted the information that how to get there. And so from that standpoint, we then suddenly realized, well, actually, this has a huge SaaS component to it, because there's so much content we can provide, and we want to create a community around this, and people were really looking to connect with others and share ideas and information. And so therefore I don't want to use the word pivoted, because I think it's like overused, and especially in early stage, because you're not really pivoting from anything because you don't really have it yet. But we changed direction, and we really
materially adjusted.
Yeah, exactly. We really started focusing on like the content and the thought leadership, and bringing in the experts, and really leveraging. I'm fortunate in that 3 of my co-founders come from deep in this space, leveraging the information and the networks that they had to be able to deliver the insight and the guidance and the content that people were looking for. And similarly around some of the services offerings that we're launching as well, we actually started getting to and understanding what people actually wanted and why, and that's how we started prioritizing. Okay, well, e-commerce is like maybe behind the SaaS platform, and it's kind of ancillary to the services, the component. And so that's how we started to kind of prioritize the build out and make sure that we focused on the right things first. So it is, I think it's, look, the early stage stuff, I don't want to say it's the hardest, but I think it's where you've got to do the heavy lifting in terms of getting in front of your customers and really spending a lot of time with them and asking them, like, what do they want and need and why? Because the why is really important too, right? And really making sure that you validate like your assumptions constantly with customers. And I have a bunch of people at my network, through my experience with customer success and support and services. Often I'll have people reach out to me and say, hey, I'm building a platform in your space. Can you give me feedback on this, right? Because they're trying to find out, like, is this a real pain point, and how much of a pain point is it, and how much would I potentially pay in a professional capacity to solve it, right? And so, it's a very, very important part of the process, and it's a very hard one to short circuit, right? And I truly believe that it is one of the most important things you can do to building a really successful, like, the time you invest up front and understanding your customers and listening to them and prioritizing what they say will actually save you time, further down the track in terms of having to like rebuild and reorient and change direction later. So, yes, it's time consuming, certainly having now gone through it firsthand in the early stages, I was like, oh, this is a lot of work. But it is absolutely critically imperative to get it right. So, and it will just save you like money and time and a lot of blood, sweat and tears by building what people actually need.
Yeah, very cool. And you just sort of highlighted something I wanted to riff on briefly around your thoughts around some of the words you used there, like, the customers wanting resources, and your team having, deep expertise and credibility. I wanted to get your thoughts on customer trust, because I think it's becoming a big deal for B2B and B2C, where everyone's pretty digitally savvy, but at the same time, they're also content savvy. Your example about, beautifully designed site automatically in a lot of people's minds implied a big cost sitting behind it. And some of those real sort of anomaly things. I mean, where do you think customer trust is at, and how do you sort of approach trying to gauge how much of that nurturing and publication of your credibility in the space you need to do? Obviously, it's an ongoing thing, but where are the sort of pinch points on that in the current world, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think depending on the industry, customer trust is in different places. I would say overall, I think customer trust has declined from where it used to be. I think I don't want to rag on social media because I'm an avid user, and like everything, there's two sides to every coin. I think there's been a big erosion of trust, and mostly around data privacy. And obviously, it's not exclusive to social media. I think it cuts across a lot of really the reality that we're now facing, right? In terms of, I want to sign up for something, or I want to trust a brand, but I want to know that you're not going to sell my data, or you're not going to spam me with 10,000 marketing messages in a 2-week period, or what have you. And I think it's valid. Honestly, I think I signed up for a webinar the other day and I got a series of 10 emails within 3 days or 2 days or something, and it's crazy. It's overwhelming. And if anything, it makes me have a slightly more negative image of the brand, because I'm like, well, if they're doing this to me and I haven't even bought something yet, what's it going to be like when I actually go ahead and purchase? And so from that standpoint, I do think the onus falls back on founders and organizations to be more mindful about how they're creating and going to market to build customer trust, right? And I think it's two things. Number one, it's how are you designing the customer experience to be transparent and to allow customers to self-serve? We made a decision very early on at Enspirement, and it may not be what is industry standard, but we will not take a credit card up front and start charging customers once the 30-day trial is over, because I inherently believe we will deliver enough value to want to have our customer base want to sign up. And from that standpoint, that is not industry standard, but we're in a market with parents and educators and daycare owners that I don't want to have one person have a bad experience, because I just don't think that's an industry that will withhold that kind of customer experience. And so from that standpoint, we were very intentional about how we design that part of our platform. And I think the second part of that is, similarly with as we've started designing our email and marketing nurture campaigns, we've been very thoughtful about how many emails do we send and when do we send them in the journey, and not over communicating with people, because we don't want to have people turned off on the brand. We've created a very high quality design-led brand for a reason, and we're committed to the impact we want to have in the space. And a part of that is really preserving that customer trust. And that's a kind of almost like a part of our brand promise. And so from that standpoint, I do think it is something you need to be very thoughtful about.
Yeah, I just remember, a mutual friend of ours, Mike Carden, talking about, nurturing and basically the concept that a customer will buy when they're ready to buy. And so the actual trick is not annoying them to the point where when they're ready to buy, you've gone off the list, right? Or you're not there for that sort of buying decision, which is quite a challenging sort of change in mindset, isn't it?
It is. It really is. I mean, we've all had those people, even on LinkedIn, right? That we're connected through so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. The next thing you get 3 messages in a day, click my Calendly and sign up. And I'm immediately disconnect. It's just, it's egregious. And it's not the way people are buying, honestly. Yep. It's really not.
Yeah, totally. A couple more questions, if you don't mind. This one's from anonymous attendee. Hi, anonymous. in the customer success area of a B2B SaaS startup, what is a good ratio to have in terms of customer support personnel to handle X number of clients, and what is a manageable number of clients for one customer support?
That's a great question. So generally speaking, it depends on which kind of segment you're in. So if you're more in kind of a high-end enterprise segment, generally speaking, the book of business, like the dollar value, is in the 2 to 5 million kind of range. If you're in more of like an SMB or more transactional segment, generally speaking, it might be in the more 1 to 2 million kind of range. So if you add up all of you might be talking about a $5,000 or $10,000 average contract value, and then you kind of add that up, and how many of those customers does it take to make $1 million? And then of course they split over the year. So from that standpoint, anything that's, I would say, $25,000 or less in terms of your average contract value, I would say give your team like a $1 to $2 million book of business to manage. And then anything that's higher than that, I would say is more kind of the 2 to 5. And of course, like it scales higher as you go higher. If you're 100K clients, it's more on the 5 million side, you're managing 50 clients kind of thing. On the lower transactional side, depending on what your average contract value is, you might be managing 100 clients across a year, or sometimes even 200 I've seen. But if they're $10,000 a piece, then what you're looking to do is break them up so the person's only managing 25 renewals quarterly, for example, or 50 renewals quarterly. And then on that lower end of the more transactional scale, I would highly recommend looking at some kind of automation to really be, like automating some of those, like those reach outs and those reminders, right? Like, do you need to have a reminder call, or can you like automatically renew the customer contract? What are the critical things that the customer success manager needs to do versus what are things that you could kind of nudge along with an email or an alert in the dashboard, or some other kind of product or technology touch point in there as well. So that's kind of, I guess, a high level answer of how to think about that.
Yeah, and I think this is a follow on from Anonymous, although there could be, I guess, a lot of anonymous people. But we have 400 customers and are currently doing customer support call and check-ins from the highest value customers downwards. But basically, going forward, obviously, it sounds like they're having a scale issue about being too time intense. Question is, do you think resorting to emails is not personal enough, and how regular do you think those proactive reach outs should be?
Yeah, this is another great question. So what I would recommend here is looking at segmenting your customer base. So if you think about a triangle or a pyramid, you've got your highest value customers at the top. That's your top, 20% of your clients. Oftentimes we're delivering 80% of the revenue, the old kind of Pareto principle. Then you've got your sort of medium clients in the middle, your tier 2 and 3. And then you've got your large kind of like often long tail clients at the bottom. And so I would look at creating some value segments. So, 0 to 10K or 0 to 50K, or whatever they are, those segments, looking at how many customers you have in each segment and what the total value of revenue is, and then look at segmenting that customer base, right? And then once you've undertaken that exercise, what I would do is define by segment what each customer then gets from a customer success management standpoint. So your very top customers in the top of the pyramid, of course, they get the red carpet treatment. They're probably having quarterly business reviews. They get a CSM that reaches out to them. They might have special training and enablement. They might have special access to the support organization, versus maybe at the bottom end of that scale, they only get like 1 touch point a year or 2 touch points a year. Maybe they don't have access to phone support. They only have access to email support, right? So you can start like defining and looking at, which services you offer to which tier, and that will allow you to get more efficiency from your team, and also serve the customers that have either the highest revenue or the highest potential revenue with the most love, and then obviously make sure everyone else is happy, but scale back on some of that personal touch so that you can then really focus on those customers that have a big upside potential, or have a large amount of revenue that you don't want to put at risk.
Very cool. And so I think just one more question here, and then we're nearly out of time. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about your founder experience before we finish up. But just to close out on that, just a slight extension, I think. So I'm not sure whether it's the same person, but they've currently got one who's doing everything from implementation through to the management and training of all enterprise clients. They've got a new person starting, and they're asking, if you're just suddenly moving from 1 to 2, how do you think about dividing those responsibilities?
Yeah, another great question. So I would think, look, you can have more than one firefighter CSM depending on, where you are in the evolution of your company and how many total people you have. So it's okay to have like 2 firefighter CSMs. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to change up the model. The way I would look at it in terms of, and you may be too early to segment as well, right? Like in terms of like, if you don't have a large number of clients, like sometimes drawing those lines gets difficult. So from that standpoint, I would think about maybe, are there certain industries that you can kind of bucket together and create kind of some verticals? And that way you can have customers managing specific, industry verticals. So you can have your CSM split by verticals. So maybe you've got like government and healthcare, and they're sort of similar but different. And then you've got like retail and technology or something like that, right? And so therefore you've got like industry kind of differentiation, and your CSMs can specialize by industry. Another way to think about that is maybe breaking it up on a regional basis. So, maybe you've got like the East Coast and through, I don't know, somewhere in the middle, like in the central time zone, and the West Coast, depending on where your customers are. Or maybe someone's managing the East Coast in Europe and someone else is managing like the West Coast in Asia, or, South Pacific and Asia versus like rest of the world kind of thing. So, ultimately what I would do is I would look at a few key criteria, probably your average contract value, probably like where the headquarters is, or the time zone or region, probably the industry vertical, and maybe look at like whether there are some other areas that you can draw some lines in there so that you can kind of cluster those companies together. Maybe depending on how complex your product is, it might be use case. You might have some customers that are all using one use case, not the other. That would be further down the track for me than a vertical or a region, potentially. But you might be able to draw some lines that way as well. Or the use of your product,
sort of
if it's a certain product or so.
So my question that's not up on the list is, have you ever fired a customer? And if so, why?
That's a great question. So certainly not at Enspirement. I'm just trying to think of, so I would say that we have, so two-pronged answer. We have chosen not to do business with customers who have been disrespectful to team members. And again, more on a consumer side. And from that standpoint, I stand by those decisions. I think if people can't be respectful, and I think it is, it's important to ensure that your team knows that they cannot be mistreated even by a customer. And I think we all know that there's a very strong link between employee experience and customer experience, and that goes both ways. And so from that standpoint, I think if customers are not showing up in a way that's respectful to team members, I do believe it needs to be addressed. So that's one thing. And certainly I have a long time ago and made decisions to fire customers more in the consumer space than in the enterprise space, but have absolutely chosen to not do business with those customers and to not do business with them on an ongoing basis. I would say on the more enterprise side, what we have done is really define what an ideal customer profile looks like, and looked at, do customers fit into this ideal customer profile? And certain examples might be if you're analyzing your customer data and you're noticing that there's, a certain percentage of churn that comes from one industry versus another industry, or one vertical versus another vertical, one use case versus another use case. By defining that in an ideal customer profile, you can then talk to and enable your sales team to not actively pursue those kinds of deals. But, and again, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like if you're in growth phase, like a lot of people think that all revenue is good, but I think particularly if you sign up large customers that don't have a strong fit with the solution you're offering, they can either take you off on a tangential path and kind of derail your vision, your product vision and your ultimate trajectory, or they may end up churning at a later date. And then of course you're going to end up with some anomalistic data in terms of your revenue and churn. So it's a discipline, right? Like it's like listening to customer feedback that you don't necessarily agree with. You really have to ask yourself, like, is this customer a customer that is going to really be receive value from the platform and the solution in the long term, or am I just doing this to get revenue in the short term? Because if it's the latter, then you may end up with issues further downstream.
Yeah, it is often framed in that revenue side, but if you look at it from a profit side and don't take the pure dollars answer of profit in terms of cost to serve, time, just leadership in terms of your point about people not being. I think it's something a lot of founders I've talked to have experienced. It's that getting some momentum with some customers, often big brands, but they're just they're just not good people to deal with.
Exactly. And it is, I mean, really about going back to, as you say, that cost to serve. Like it might be great if it might be a 100K customer, but if you've got 70% of your team always on standby, high alert, what's the opportunity cost of what they might be doing with customers that are a better, stronger fit? And out in the market, right? So I do think it's a hard one, definitely to solve, but I do think it is one that is worth kind of having the discipline to be really thoughtful about that.
Yeah, very cool. We've got a few minutes left. I want to switch to Kirsty Traill founder mode and just, you're in the trenches now, so to speak, with the team at Enspirement. I mean, what's your perspective on that in terms of what been, the most challenging community from your point of view about founder life?
That's a good one. I mean, I'm very fortunate to have 3 amazing co-founders, and I think that the key is that, the relationship and the communication, the transparency that we have with each other. I think, if something's not working, we're very candid about the fact that it's not working, but we're very solutions oriented in terms of like, what do we need to do to address this? And so from that standpoint, I do think that level of communication and that regular kind of commitment to checking in and making sure that we're aligned and all agree on the paths forward. And if we don't agree, then like we have a really robust conversation about that and figure out a way through it, versus just being kind of a majority rule, right? And so from that standpoint, I think knowing and understanding, like we all have very different and unique skill sets in different areas of the business, and respecting those skill sets of each other and knowing when to leverage somebody else's skill set. And that person is more of an expert in certain areas, I think has really helped us a lot, because we're not all trying to get in each other's way and kind of, change the course or overly influence something without having that subject matter expertise. But we have enough knowledge of each other's respective areas to be able to provide input and challenge where necessary and ultimately try and get better outcomes. So that I think is absolutely critical. I think every day is completely different. I mean, certainly in startup land, at the larger startups, there's more of those kind of regular things that take up time that they're important, but how much value do they really add? Like, you know, the forecasting meetings and the, you know, the regular check-ins and of course, those are really, really important. But at the same time, I think when you're lifting something up off of the ground, there is a strong bias to action and making sure that everybody does what they say they're going to do, and you know, everybody trusts the people that are doing it and that they're doing, you know, what they're supposed to do in their swim lane. And having that level of trust and confidence and respect for each other, I think is really important. And really looking at, like, what's the stuff that we really, you know, that ruthless prioritization, what's the stuff that we really absolutely critically need to do now versus tomorrow versus next week versus next month. Because there's so much to do to lift a business off the ground that you can't do everything at once, and you kind of have to divide and conquer, but you've really got to be sure and understand what the sequencing and the phasing and the process looks like, so that you can divide and conquer and not work on things that you don't maybe need to work on for another couple of months and what have you. But at the same time, balance that with at least a long-term perspective, so that you're not so focused on executing that you lose sight of where your ultimate goal is long-term. So, you know, I think that's probably, and I mean, that's similar, I would say, in a startup, right? Like, always an eye on the vision, but a maniacal focus on making sure that you do what you say you'll do and you'll execute. But I think, you know, really trusting that, given that there's only 4 of you and everyone has to do kind of everything, like knowing how and where to divide that and how to prioritize that to really deliver on, you know, new customers and new revenue as the key priority is really key.
Fantastic. Great way to wind up. It's been a fabulous session. I've been looking forward to this for some time. As I say, community out there, I'm sure you've got a lot of value out of this. And again, the irony of just needing more and more prompting around customer, which sort of seems logical, but there's just so much to it. And really appreciate you spending some time with us, Kirsty. Thank you so much.
Thanks for doing it, Tom. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody, and catch you again at the next webinar.
Thanks.
Ka kite. Bye.